People who get locked into a vision. All right, that's it, man. That's their drive. That's their passion. Critics don't matter. This don't matter. They're going to do whatever it fucking takes to be the best at what they do.
This is Dave Tate back again with another episode of Table Talk. We're doing another segment of just Q&As. They seem to be the most popular and what people like best. I guess that kind of is redundant to what I just said, popular and like best. But either way, this is what we're doing because it's what you want. So we're going to take questions from the live stream. We're going to take them from the Instagram. And we're going to take them from archives of questions that we saved from the past. Those that are listening on YouTube, that's the live stream that I'm talking about. I have to kind of describe where the live streams are because this podcast is blasted out. We're on iTunes, Spotify,
Stitcher, Libsyn, and then elitefts.com.
Yeah, so anywhere that you guys are watching this, make sure to comment, like, or whatever you're supposed to do on those platforms to be able to help us out a little bit and to get more traffic readers. I'm not going to really change the direction of what we're doing because of the traffic or readers. We haven't done so up to this point. Don't believe in doing so moving forward, but it does help the more that you guys can interact, whatever platform you're on, with the content that we're able to provide, because we're going to be able to put out more of the content of what you're actually looking for. So let us know that as well in the comments or in the live feed. So we're going to start with the first question that Josh has already pulled up for us.
Okay. First one here from Instagram is, did you ever go through periods where you actually dreaded training because you knew you were just a shadow of what you were in your prime, and where the fear of failure and disappointment at your current state is so overwhelming you can almost choke back tears because you know you won't ever be back to where you were?
Yes, but not yes. That's such a big yes in so many different ways. There's a lot to unpack here, I suppose. So I'm gonna go back a little while. Actually, I'll answer the question as is. So the question's coming more from the standpoint of you're a lifter that's past your prime, and that happens. You always, for a while after past your prime, you always kind of think that there's a way that you're going to be able to get back to where your prime is. And I guess we all kind of do, regardless of how far past the prime we actually get. There's always that little voice in your head that thinks, given the right circumstances, and if you can string together enough training in a row, that you can get back to better than your best. And where the rubber meets the road on that is where the disappointment comes in, because you try to put those weeks together and you realize that you can't put them together the way that you used to. So yes. So I guess the answer is more along the lines of, how do you counter that without wanting to beat yourself in the head with nunchucks or a baseball bat all the time, and every time you go in the gym, not being disappointed with how bad you suck compared to what you were before. So the first thing is to understand what you're comparing to. And, it's easy to say don't compare yourself to others, but you're still going to. But in the situation that I'm being asked about here, it's actually you're comparing yourself to yourself, which is what you optimally should do at all times through all phases, because that's really the only thing you can control when it comes to strength and conditioning, powerlifting, anything like that. You can just control what you bring to the table, and that's it. You can't control what other people do. But the more competitive you are, and when you're competing, you're going to be trying to figure out where you compare to others. It's probably more prevalent today than when I was competing, because I didn't have social media and all those things. I mean, we had the internet, so I'm not that goddamn old, but we had that, or at least I did through the back end of my career. So what I'm trying to get at here is, I don't know even if I had social media if I would have been using that to compare myself to others in the first place, because I've always kind of been raised with the thought process to not do that, to not have idols. And so I don't know, I would look at Powerlifting USA Top 100 when that came out, but even in that regard, I would look at it once and then I wouldn't worry about it again, because I can't control that. I can only control what I can. Where when you get older, you start breaking down a lot after you've been doing this for a long time. You are comparing yourself to what you used to be able to do. And that's the problem, because a lot of things you can't do what you used to be able to do before, just because of limitations, restrictions, all these things that come up, which it is hard. I'm not going to bullshit that. I'm not going to lie about that. It is hard until you figure out how to sidestep it so it's not an issue. So some of the tricks that I've always used is I won't do the movements that I know I used to be good at. That way I don't have a base of comparison. So very rarely, for example, am I going to do a close grip floor press. I know what my best is on that. I know what my best is at different weight classes. I know where my best is with different grips. I know all that. And I know I'm not going to be anywhere close to that. So rather than do it and be disappointed at how bad I suck, because that would happen if I did it. I'm not the type of person that's going to justify, that this is not as good as what it used to be because A, B, C. And every one of us that are in this position can list A all the way to Z with reasons why it's not as good. But I don't even want to get in that situation. So I'll do a floor press with a shit ton of chain, and I don't know what's good. Or I will do it with a bar that I've never used before, or a grip. I'll find a way to do it, even if it's so fucked up that it's like a reverse band press with weight releasers and chains and off a board and all kinds. It doesn't really matter, because I want to fuck it up so bad that I have no idea what's good. And then if nobody else does it that trains in the place that I do, then to me, I'm the best person doing it. So I don't have to deal with the comparison of what it was before. And in some regards, if I stick to movements that I'll create more or less, I'm not saying I invented them, but movements that I'm going to add to my training program that will be max effort movements or so forth. Another example would be a high box spider bar, reverse band squat. I may have left one component out of that, but that's what I'll use. And then I'll train with that, because it's the safest out of all the options that I can come up with at the time. I can push that. I don't know what's good. I don't even know what's good compared to other people. I'm not naive enough to know that I can stick somebody in and have somebody do it that's a top competitive lifter today, and they're probably going to be able to do fucking 10 with whatever I do a single with. I'm not naive enough to think that what I'm doing is going to be way stronger than somebody that's in their peak or their prime by any means. But I don't know for me what's good. All I know is, if I pick the right exercise or the right objective to be able to work toward, it's going to be just as hard to work toward as a max squat or bench or deadlift was. And my prime is going to take just as long. It's going to take the same thought process to overcome sticking points and obstacles that are going to come along the way. From that standpoint, then I can still derive that same satisfaction, even though it's not quote unquote, my prime. I'm defining prime a little bit differently. It's the prime, the best I can do now, without having to resort back to a comparison that's going to drive me nuts. Because it will still drive. I mean, you compete in something for fucking 30 some years or whatever it is, it's going to drive you nuts. There's no way around that. So if you know it's going to drive you nuts, you can control that by just not doing what's going to drive you nuts. So going back to what you can control and what you can't control. Now, the dreading the training part, I've always had times like that. I guess probably I didn't between the ages of maybe 13 and 20, then you want to train every day, twice a day. And a lot of times I did train twice a day, every day, because you just want more and more and more and more of that. But once I started to understand that you have to recover between training and figure out that the recovery is actually more important than the training stimulus, then that started to change a little bit. The longer you do something, the more tedious it becomes, because you put 10 years into doing something, then you realize that it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of consistency, it takes a lot of effort. You don't really ever lose the passion for it, but you understand the process way better after 10, 15, even 20 years. It all changes. Every 5 years, it changes a little bit more to where, it's like, fuck, excuse me. The process is what it is, and I'm having a hard time trying to explain what I want to say with this. So you dread it a little bit more because you understand the significance of how long something is really going to take. So, for instance, you do a meet or you achieve a training objective, if it's to be leaner or if it's to lift more, whatever it's going to be, then you achieve that. That's very short-lived. Anybody that has been around this for a long enough period of time knows what I'm talking about. You bust your ass for a very specific goal or objective, then you get that goal or objective, and it's anticlimactic as hell. It's not anything what you thought it was going to be. And after you hit, several of those, you understand it's not going to be what you thought it was going to be. So you keep striving for, bigger and better to see what that's going to be. And then once you come off of that, and then it's time to plan what the next step is going to be or the next objective is going to be, your brain kicks in to that mode of, fuck, this isn't just something that's 3 weeks out. This is going to take 6 months, maybe a year to get to that next objective. And with that comes a little bit of, there comes excitement, most definitely, but there also comes a little dread, because fuck, do I really want to do this again? And the longer you do it, the more you begin asking that. You still do, it doesn't change if you're going to do it or not do it. I guess for some it might, but for me, it's never really changed that. In some ways, it makes you mad to where you're going to probably do it more so because of the challenge of just doing it. But I can distinctly remember when training at Westside, I knew every exit there was to be able to not go from my house to Westside. And for the last 5 years or so there, it was a 30-minute commute to be able to get there. So I knew every interstate exit. I knew every street exit where I could turn around and go home. And I never did, not once. But I wanted to a lot, a lot. I can't even state how much I wanted to. But in my mind, that was all kind of part of the whole process, because every time I didn't, exit to turn around, then it's a small win, I suppose, a small victory just in that standpoint. And at the same time, every time my brain would say, turn around, go back, it's too early, you're too tired, you're too beat up, you're fucking everything hurts, whatever it's going to be, all these excuses that you're coming up in your head, it pisses me off. So if I have 6 exit before I get there, that's 6 opportunities for me to get even more pissed, stacked upon each other. So by the time I get to the gym, I'm going to be actually ready to train. So if I don't think I would have showed up ready to train as much or as hard as what I needed to if I was excited the whole time there, especially during the last 5 years of my competitive career. So it's a normal thing. It sucks, man. It sucks. I mean, as you get older, it really sucks, because you start to see that you've actually probably trained more training sessions in your life than you have training sessions left in your life. And that's a fucked up thought, so you want to kind of make them all count. If you're on the backside of how many training sessions you have left, I don't want to not make them count. But yeah, I think everybody goes through it to a certain degree. There's definitely phases where it's worse, and then there's phases where it's better. So for me, if I can pick and find an objective that I have to work for, That's the key thing. If it's just an objective that's just like cherry picking a goal that I know is going to be easy to beat, that doesn't do anything. That's it does nothing for me. But if it's something that I have to sit and think, man, I don't even know if this is possible, that will motivate me to push forward. And then the worst part of that process isn't the last 3 or 4 months that it's going to take to get to the objective. It's the first couple months to be able to get into the right conditioning, to be able to even start to attack the objective. That's when it sucks the worst, because that's usually where you're detrained. You're basically not ready. So you got to get ready, but you can't get ready if you're not showing up and doing it. But with most of the people that are going to ask me this question that are kind of in the same boat, the issue isn't not showing up. The issue is going to be what you're doing when you're there, because it's very easy to show up and just help a lot of other people out. I've done it, man, probably hundreds of times, where you know you should do something, but you do like one thing and then spend all the rest of the time helping everybody else out. That's okay for certain phases, but once you start trying to put the throttle down, you can't do that. You know, it's got to be more structured and so forth. So I just look at it all as a normal process and just accept it for what it is and look for those big key objectives. I talked in circles a lot here, but it's kind of hard to explain when you're in it than when you're not. And I'm kind of still in it. So the whole time I'm speaking all this, you know, the other voice in my head is like, fuck it, this sucks. You know, so it's the same thing. You just got to be able to deal with it.
A lot of good points there. All right, we're just going to go down the list of the live stream questions here.
Mm-hmm.
Next one is going to be, what was your favorite exercise for strengthening and stabilizing your knees? And then after that, for the shoulders.
Okay. I was pretty fortunate to not have a lot of knee issues. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. You know, obviously genetics is going to click up there, you know, with the top reason. You know, if I'm going to blame genetics on, or not blame, but if I'm going to say genetics is a key component of some of the major injuries that I have had, I have to also accept the fact that they're a main component of a lot of the injuries that I never had. So with knee history, I had an issue in high school. I know what the hell. It was squatting, actually, where I thought I blew my fucking knee out. And it was a high pin squat where squatting off the pin. I don't even know what the fuck I was doing, thinking back on it. But it was an overload high pin squat or whatever it was, and my knee popped and I couldn't walk, and I was on crutches for a month. But no surgery required. That was probably the worst knee issue that I've ever had. So I've never had, outside of what I perceive was just, you know, quad tendonitis. So the pain, you know, in the lower quad, pain, you know, under the kneecap, around the knee, off and on. You know, I've probably had that for a long time, more decades, you know, longer than I can remember, but completely off and on. And after I quit competing, I was more open to using cortisone. When I was competing, I didn't want to use cortisone ever at all, never, and never did. Just because I wanted to know exactly and feel exactly what was going on. The cortisone after, not that big of a deal because I can take the time off to let the cortisone do what it's supposed to do. So I have had several cortisone shots in my right knee, and there's shit in there. There's arthritis everywhere. So that's bone spurs, arthritis, typical shit that you're going to have if you've been doing this as long as I have. For the most part, it doesn't light up a lot, but when it does light up, it's bad. So when it does light up, squatting hurts. You know, it hurts a lot. And one of the other reasons why I don't think my knees took the same punishment is maybe some other people is I sat back a lot. So I always kept, you know, a positive shin angle. And there's pros and cons, you know, because that shin angle can also be why my hips took the blunt of all the load and why I got 2 hip replacements, because I was putting most of the force on the hips instead of the knee. So it's, You know, what do you want to have, the knee issues or the hip issues and so forth. So I just wanted the biggest squat, so I went with wherever I was the strongest on the squat. To answer the question, what I did when it would light up and it would become an issue, it never was an issue for more than a week for me. So I'm an ice guy. You know, I'm ice guy. I'm an ice guy. You know, I didn't say I'm a nice guy. Kind of. But anyhow, if something started to hurt immediately, then I put ice on it for the first 24 hours. So just old school in that way. I guess I lean towards the older ways from that standpoint because it's always helped. It's always worked. Now, not icing all the time because that's counterproductive. It's, you know, just icing enough to get any inflammation out and keep any swelling down. So ice, you know, immediately, and then a day after that, try to start to get as much blood in there as I possibly could. You know, very rarely did I use heat. You know, I like movement instead of that. So things like TKEs, terminal knee extensions, are huge for me. Fucking huge. So mini band if it's really, really bad, a light band if it's just bad, you know, so nothing should really be done in pain, so to say, where the way I define that is if it's a TKE that I'm doing and I do the first set with a mini band or a monster mini band, and a TKE is basically just putting the band around your knee, so it's pulling your knee forward. So it could be slightly higher than your knee level or level with your knee, you know, just looped around a power rack or thrown around any piece of equipment and then stuck behind your knee, and you just bend your knee, flex your knee, bend your knee, flex your knee. It's that easy. You know, you can search it anywhere. Very few people are doing it wrong. So the videos are pretty common sense on this. So if the mini band hurt for 10, 15 reps, and I wasn't doing TKEs at all, but if it only hurt for 3 or 4 reps and then it didn't hurt as much on 4 to 5, and then by the time I got to 10, it didn't hurt at all, then that was the movement that I was going to use. And typically for me, that was always the case. It was just a matter of how much band was I actually going to be able to use. And then to do them in a concentrated form. So I'm making sure that I'm flexing the quads. I'm making sure that I'm just not using momentum to do the movement. The TKEs were huge. The other huge thing with that, and they all always coincided with each other, was seated calf raises, just for stabilization of the knee joint. The seated calf raises always were better than the standing. They were always better than toe pushes. They were always better than anything else. So it's the only reason why I have a seated calf raise in my gym. It's the only reason why I like the seated calf raise outside of bodybuilding purposes is the TKEs and seated calf raises gold, you know, for any knee issues I ever had. So a few days of doing that, knee issues are gone. And I would not keep them in is a prehabilitation type exercise if I didn't need it. So if it's lit up, then I will keep it in for 5, 6, maybe 7 weeks after that, just to make sure it doesn't get lit up again. But I won't keep it in year round because it's going to be unnecessary, because the only reason it got lit up is because I fucked something up. You know, either, you know, for me, if I squat with too much band tension, that's going to light it up for sure. If, you know, I fall forward a little bit coming out of the hole on a squat, in other words, my knee shifts forward a little bit instead of staying in that neutral position for me, that's going to light it up some. So I'm trying to avoid all those situations from that standpoint. But by far, that was it. And if it's really, really beat up in there to where it's where you stick your finger down into the quad tendon area and push around, you can feel how gnarly and crap it is, then I'll dig it out, you know, it's the best I can. And if I can't dig it out because it hurts too bad, then I'll have somebody else do it. I've had luck in the past couple of years with dry needling with it. Dry needling didn't do shit for anything else for me, but it did for that. So don't know why, but that's kind of my gold with that, because if it does light up on you, or at least for me, if it does light up on me, I can probably force my way through a squat workout and it's not going to make any difference. It's just going to hurt. And everything for me, everything hurts to a certain degree no matter what I'm doing. So I'm not saying that's right or it's wrong. It's just me. So it's the degree of how much, it's going to hurt. I can probably force through it if I had to, but the benefit of no longer competing, and this kind of goes back to the first question I answered, is I can always push back whatever my objective is. So I don't have to force a training session through pain because I can just move whatever my objective is back a couple weeks. So when I set a main training objective, I'm setting to be able to do that within a couple month time frame. So it could be some type of big specialty bar squat that will happen 5 months from now in, August or September. So I don't have a defined date. I would like to, but I don't. I have a striking range that this is kind of when I want it to happen. So when I have that and things happen, like that, I can push that back if need be. If I don't have to, then I won't. So when you compete, that changes stuff because you have that defined date. So you have to figure out how to push through things if that's the decision that you've made. And it was a decision I always made, was to keep that date and get there no matter what. I don't have to do that anymore. So that is what I did for my issues. I do think that you should always figure out what the problem is. So I have an orthopedic that I'm on a very good first name basis with, and I have a doctor that I'm on a very first name basis with, and multiple physical therapists that, I'm speaking with on a fairly regular basis, depending upon, what the issue is. So I know, and if I don't know what it is, and it's kind of a crapshoot, then, I'll have an MRI, I'll have some imaging done so I can figure out a little better, because the images don't mean what people really think they do. I mean, it will tell you if there's inflammation or if something's tore and stuff. But, as John Russin said one time, you're not your MRI. And I completely agree with that. You're not your MRI. I've seen people with horrible MRIs that have full movement and strong as fuck. I've also seen people with great MRIs that can't do stuff because the pain is so bad. So that you can't sit there and say the person that can't do anything because the pain is so bad, but all their imaging is good. You can't sit there and say, oh, it's all in your head. It might be, but it's doubtful, because if they're serious about their training, I highly doubt it's all in their head. And vice versa. You can't take the person that feels great, strong as hell, doesn't have any issues, and tell them that they got to completely dial everything back because their imaging looks like shit. But if you're trying to figure out what the exact issue is, the imaging can help, because sometimes it may not even be the joint that you're experiencing the pain in. It can be transferent from someplace else, and that's what you need to be able to figure out as well. All right, that's it with that one.
Okay, back to the live stream here. What's the biggest mistake you've seen being made in terms of programming, conjugate or other? I know you recently mentioned that you think people nowadays are program hopping too often.
Yes, and that's a problem, because there's a lot of issues. So if I was to pinpoint for today, because my answer tomorrow could be completely different, but if I was to pinpoint for today what the biggest problem is, it's that everybody thinks that the best program is the one that they're currently not doing. And that was quoted to somebody years ago, many, many years ago, that was the statement, that the best program you're doing is the one you're currently not doing. And to some degree, I kind of will agree with that to some degree. But what happens is, when you if you've been doing a program that you've been successful on the program, and it's a long-term program, it's just not some 10, 12-week deal that you found from somebody or got from somebody and you're doing that, but something that you've been doing for a while that is cyclical, and it has, different periodization phases, and it's cycling through different goals and objectives. And you've had success on it, and then all of a sudden you're not having success on it. What you have to define what that not having success really is. So let's default back to a power lifter, and they're working squat, bench, and deadlift. So there's 3 main objectives that are being developed throughout a training program. And let's say their squat just isn't going anywhere. They're like, fuck, this sucks. I need to do a different program. But their bench and their deadlift is, it's doing really well. They're going to completely abandon what's working for, 66% of the training objectives because 33% may not be moving the way that they want it to move. That doesn't make sense to me. So if you use conjugate, as an example, you got max effort work for squat. Let's just say squat, deadlift, and bench. Then you got dynamic work for squat, deadlift, and bench. And let's say the deadlift isn't what's moving, but, your speed work is going well, max effort work's going well on all the lifts. So this very small percentage, maybe 20%, you're not happy with what's going on with the program. I would be more keen to figuring out what you need to do to get that 20% moving right. Or in the first example, the 33% moving right, what's not working there? And then hone in on what needs to be addressed to be able to make that work. Because that's far easier to do and fix than to just blindly say, this isn't working, I need to do something else, than completely jumping to something else that you have no idea how that's going to work. And then start progressing through there. Because in most periodization schemes, when you jump to a new program, you're going to be starting at a lower level, a conditioning phase or something like that. So you may not even know how well it's really going to work until you get back into a strength phase or some type of power phase or, heavier weight phase. And that could be 2 months off. And then you get there and let's say it does work. Well, did it work because it's that program, or did it work because you had all this conditioning work that you did that you weren't doing in the other program because of where you were in the training program? So the program hopping, to me, it's the issue, but it's not so much the program hopping, it's the reason why they're doing the hopping. If you're doing the hopping because everything's going okay with the program, you're happy with it, but you just don't like it. It doesn't jive with your personality. It doesn't jive with your training style. It doesn't jive with a lot of things. And you just want to do something different. Then that's a good justification to me on a reason to try and move to a different program. But if most of it's working, or even half of it's working, I don't understand why you'd want to jump to another program when you already have half of it figured out. It's just how to figure out the other half. So the better question would be targeted more towards what isn't working, and then what are some ideas that you could do to be able to try to get that back on pace again. Okay.
All right, next one is best accessory exercises for the squat. And then he said transfer do powerlifting. I don't know what that means, but maybe the transfer to powerlifting?
Yeah. I'm going to answer it straight up instead of falling back to what I always say, and that's technique's usually the problem. When it comes to technique and program structure is usually the problem. It's not exercises. And the reason for that is I can list exercises here, which I will do. And most of you can take those exercises, start doing those exercises. Maybe the squat will go up, but probably not, because it's not usually an exercise issue. Because what people will typically do is I'll list off a few exercises. They're going to just start doing them in the program. They're going to throw them right over top what they've been doing. So it's going to increase the workload. It's going to increase the volume, which in many cases may put them over a tipping point to where now they're not going to be able to recover from the work they're doing. Or they're going to take it and they're going to replace it. You're going to take something out of the program, pull it out, put this in place of that, where what they're pulling out of the program may be the actual thing that's helping to drive the lift. So now they're going to pull that out, put something else in there, which may actually be worse than what they actually put in. So before all that, look at the accessories that you're currently doing and look at how you're executing those. Are you executing those with intent? So if you're doing 3 sets of 8, for instance, what exactly are those 3 sets of 8? Are they 3 sets of 8 to where you may only have 1 or 2 reps left in the tank after each set? Or are they 3 sets of 8 to where if somebody really pushed you, you might be able to do 15 or 16 instead of the 8? So where is that because what is the intent there? And what's the structured intent, or by structure, what's the programmed intent? Because sometimes it may want to be programmed to where there's 5 to 6 reps left. Other times it's going to be programmed to where you're pushing a little harder, working a little harder. So how hard are you working on the accessories that you're currently doing? A. How are the accessories being performed? B. What are what's the technique of those movements? Is it the same every time you do it, or does it change? In other words, is your technique really bad one time, really good one time, really bad one time, or always bad, or you never thought of it? Which is the whole other thing. You never thought of it. How important is technique on a glute ham raise or reverse hyper or whatever you're doing for those accessories. So the intent's a big thing, because you can keep the same accessory exercise in all year and just change the way that it's done, and that's enough. The glute ham raise, we have an article on elitefts.com. We've changed the title of it several times for SEO reasons and stuff like that, but it used to be called pumping the posterior. Then it was 16 ways to use a glute ham raise. I think if you just search glute ham raise, it will pop up. And it lays out, you can do eccentric only glute ham raises, you can do weight releasing glute ham raises, you can do glute ham raises on an incline, on a decline, with a weight vest, with a med, there's all different ways that you can load that to where it can, in tempo that you can change on that, and intensification principles that you can put on that to be able to get the best out of that over that period of time. So if you have, what I'm trying to say is, if you had an accessory or have an accessory that is doing well for you, and it's always done well for you, a lot of the times it may not be doing well for you anymore because you haven't changed the way that it's being executed. So you've completely adapted to what that exercise can do. Now, it's simply just by changing the tempo, changing the way that it's loaded, the position that it's loaded in, glute ham raise, falling back on that, holding the weight in your torso, say a plate, holding it by your gut, a plate holding more towards your chest, a plate holding behind your head, all that changes the way that lift is going to be loaded. If it's a weight vest compared to a plate, a weight vest compared to a med ball rounded over the med ball compared to keeping a more neutral torso position, all that changes the movement too. So those are things to cycle through there. So to answer the question, now that I've said all that, which is more important than answering the question, is for the squat, things like, it depends on how you squat. So if you're using more posterior chain when you squat, sitting back a lot, then prime things are going to be like an inverse leg curl, glute ham raise, RDL, Dimmel deadlifts, reverse hypers, things that are going to target the posterior chain or the hamstrings from origin and insertion throughout the whole time. Those are key. Those are gold. Now, if it's more of a quad dominant, and I say all these, and I look in the air, and I say all these very loosely, because there's no such thing as like a quad only squat or a hamstring only squat. You're still working fucking everything. It's just which is defined by the public and the people listening. So when I say quad dominant, they understand potentially a closer stance. The knees are going to be drifting forward a little bit more. So that's kind of what I'm saying. From that standpoint, you're going to look at things like a front squat, a high bar or a safety bar type squat, something that's going to load that even more so from that standpoint. So those would be the main go-to type lifts for that.
Okay. Next one on the list. What sort of program would you recommend for a 50-year-old for 3 times a week only sessions? And he said he's already an intermediate with a squat of 365, a deadlift with 450, a bench of 280. And he said he's been on 531 for over 3 years now.
Okay. Even if you can just train 3 days a week and you find a program that's laid out on a 4-day-a-week scenario, then you can still use that on a 3-day-a-week breakdown. Just Monday, Wednesday, Friday, then the 4th day would be that next Monday. And it just cycles through on an 8-day period instead of a 5 or a 7-day period. that's the biggest thing that I see that people forget and they don't take into consideration. The only place where that gets a little weird is if you are trying to peak for a meet that's got a specific day and you want to deload, or, you know, you're going to have to work backwards from the meet to see exactly what day each thing needs to fall on. You can't forward think as much with this situation because you don't want to end up with your last heavy deadlift being the Monday before a meet, for instance. You know, that might be better to be the bench to be able to fall on that. So just work it back that way. So that opens your opportunities on what you're looking at now, because more than likely you're looking for and you're vetting out programs that are situated around 3 days a week. And that's where you're finding the restriction with what you're looking for. Don't do that. So, you know, a little more open mind on that, and then you can look from that standpoint and go that direction. And I know a lot of people, and I've always known a lot of people, it's not so much age related, that can only get in twice a week, say Monday, Thursday, something along those scenarios. And they would break out the same 4 days over 2 weeks. So from that standpoint, because that's broke out even more, the accessory work may want to be a little bit more at the end of each session. And you might want to take the volume up a little more on the work sets than what you would typically see, because the only reason for that is because you're going to have longer period to recover from. So you still have to be worried about recovery, but more than likely you're going to recover in a situation like that, no matter what the stimulus is. So you don't want it to be so much that it's going to, you know, run you in the dirt and, you know, lead to injury or something like that. But you can push it a little bit more than what you would if it was going to be all pushed into a 5 or 6 day period. So that would be my answer for that, the easiest answer.
Okay. Next one is a guy that uses conjugate as a raw lifter. Says he's 8 weeks out, and he's talking about when you mentioned peaking and tapering for a meet, that you said that the last heavy deadlift was 21 days out, squat about 14, and bench about 7. He's asking if these are max effort movements, or is like the pull and opener for deads, as an example, all heading into the meet with a reduction of volume on DE day, on the dynamic effort days. He's no circle max being used.
All right. Based upon those recommendations, that's intermediate or above. So that's kind of how I would define that. And those would be the last heavy training days. So that you can do another deadlift day, say 14 days out, but it's not going to be the heaviest day of the training cycle. It might be 60%, 70%, you know, something like that. So it's going to be scaled back a little bit more. So when you're laying the program out, you know, everybody who's a competitor kind of has numbers in their head of what their last heavy session should be. That's where I would plant those. That session needs to be here, and if it's a specific max effort exercise, that's where it's going to be. You know, that's going to be at that point, and that will be some type of pull from that standpoint. But you can still do speed pulls, for instance. If you squat on Friday, which is, you know, kind of like International Powerlifter Squat Day. You know, if you're squatting, you can still do the speed pulls after that, but it's just going to be slightly lighter if it's that 8 to 10 days, you know, out, 8 to 10 days out, whatever that's going to be. It can still be there. It's just it's going to be, you know, broke down a little bit, kind of like what the squat would be. So it can still be in there. So it's not that deadlift has to completely be stopped and abandoned at 21 days out. For lifters that aren't built to deadlift, then I would probably have another deadlift day in before the meet, but at a lot lighter weight, just to kind of keep the form and the technique on point. You know, those that are built to pull might be able to go 14 days out and get another pull in there that other people otherwise may not be able to do, and put that in there as well. So I don't know if that really answered the question, but I think it's good enough.
Yeah. This guy said dive bomb or controlled ascent for the squat and how to train for each.
It depends on the person and how comfortable they are. I personally never liked a dive bomb descent, but I also don't like a descent that's too controlled. So a dive bomb's a really hard thing to be able to train and condition somebody to be or to do. I played around with it myself before, gear got really crazy. Gear gets really, you can't dive. I mean, if you try, if you have multiply shit on, you can't really dive bomb, but you are trying, if you took the gear off, and that's exactly what I was trying to do. Bend my knees and just let the shit go, because it was the only way I was going to be able to get, to a depth that was going to allow the squat to pass, and there's just so much shit that's being bound up in there. And the slower that you go down, if you're wearing a shit ton of gear, there's almost no hope in hell that you're ever going to be able to get close to parallel or break parallel. I'm not even sure that's, people may disagree with me, but it may, if there's enough gear on there, I don't know how the fuck anybody is really going to break parallel, because there's so much shit that's being piled up on the hip flexors that you need to get to parallel or to a point to where, it's going to pass. So optimally, it should be parallel. So, and kind of go from there. But if in that situation, which is going to be probably nobody that's listening to me, the intent has to be dropping fast, kind of the same way in a bench shirt. You can't lower in a bench shirt slow, even though it looks slow. That can't be the intent. And, raw or even single ply gear, to an extent, it's almost just as strong as multiply anymore. But you have the ability to be able to let it go a little bit more, to pick up a little bit more momentum, which again in the gear, it helps you, to be able to get more rebound out of the gear, so to say. If you're wearing the gear for a rebound, some gear you're not wearing for that. Some gear you're wearing just to stop you. And then it's almost like a box squat where you launch out of the bottom from that standpoint. So take the gear away. And now what's the benefit of a dive bomb if you're wearing sleeves, which nobody gets a fucking shit ton of carryover out of sleeves, relatively speaking. So I don't know what the benefit's going to be, how it's really going to help. It's not going to create that much more stretch reflex that's going to make any noticeable difference. So I just kind of see it more of a situation that there's more things to fuck up, because the speed is going faster than the lifter's ability to control the technique in almost every case. Not all. Some people have phenomenal technique and can pull this off and never break technique. And I can probably say with some, their technique's better when they do this. So on the opposite end, when you go too slow, you're just exhausting yourself on the way down. So you need to, all this aside, you need to find the tempo of descent that's going to work best for you. So it's going to allow you to stay in position, which is the most important thing, more than anything else, because you get out of position, you're fucked, bottom line. So you have to stay in position. So whatever speed that you can go the fastest with and still stay in best position, that's what you want to do. You don't want to be slower than that or faster than that.
Okay. This seems like a question for JM, but maybe you have some insight on it. The guy said, when doing JM 6x6, how important is working up to a single before doing the 6x6 to having success with the program? JM usually only mentions it briefly. Do you have any insight on that at all?
He would probably say that it's important for, the protocol that he would work under, because you want to be able to have a good relative base of what that percentage is going to be based on from that standpoint. I would say that it's going to depend a lot on the frequency of the training. So if the bench is being trained twice a week and you're going to work up to a 1 rep max each time to be able to determine what the work sets are, I would not think that would be the best idea unless somebody has been conditioned to do that. The funny thing with training is, regardless of whatever your frequency is, you can be conditioned to adapt to pretty much any frequency as long as it's given a long period of time. So, for example, you probably can train yourself to recover squatting heavy every day. That's not saying that you can say, I'm going to start squatting heavy every day on Monday and go that route. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you probably start at once a week, then you go at once a week heavy, then once a week moderate, or actually once a week heavy, once a week light, then progress to once a week heavy and once a week moderate, and then twice a week heavy. And then over a period of several years, you can build the ability to adapt to that higher frequency. I'm only stating that because when you answer questions like this, there's always going to be somebody that's going to say, no, that's bullshit, because they're not looking at it within a full context. And whoever's speaking isn't speaking and providing a full context. That most definitely you can train at higher frequencies, but most people don't take the time to build the work capacity and the ability to adapt to the frequency they're training at. So I don't care what study somebody puts in front of me that speaks of training frequencies, because I don't know of any study that's talked about building that work capacity over a quadrennial to develop the ability to recover from that frequency. There's not. They're not done for that long a period of time. So that's kind of where, research is great. I'm never a person that's going to come out and say research sucks. I think I subscribe to every freaking research journal or summary journal that's out there, and then spend countless hours clicking through on the abstracts that they're quoting in the journals. I love that kind of shit. So that it has its purpose. It initiates thoughts and initiates ideas, and it can attack your biases, which is a good thing. You can also use it to confirm your biases, which I don't think is a good thing, but it all has to be taken in context with real world experience and what you've seen over a period of time. So getting back to all this, the JM and, should you be able to do it? That's why I'm providing this context here, because if that was something that he was doing and he was doing it, every fifth day or whatever it was, he had 10 years of training into that to be able to recover for that, and doing so in a progressive way that he got stronger over the 10 years. So he's adapting to that as well. So to be able to take and just apply it, to somebody out of the gate may not be the best thing. But I will say, if you're training on a percentage-based program, you need some way to be able to determine, especially in the format that he's speaking about, a 5.5 or a 6.6, to where you're going to be making micro progressions each time you do it. You need some way to be able to determine a striking range of what that weight should be that's not based on what you benched at your last meet 3 months ago. So something that's more based on real time. And that leaves options of either maxing out or what I call a perceived max, working up enough that you kind of get an idea what you could do if you had to do it. Or, a competitive max, which is not the most optimal, but it's better than nothing. And and RPE would be another one. And there's probably other ones that I'm forgetting about this time. But something, and whatever that something is, just needs to be consistent. each time that you're doing it. Because if you start using a training max one time, or perceived max one time, or perceived max one time, competitive max one time, then the likelihood that that's going to be successful is going to be far less than if you just stuck to one the whole time. So I hope that answers that.
I would say so. This guy said, when squatting and coming out of the hole, should I think hips or chest up first? Lead with the hips or the chest? For box and for box, or for squat and for the box squat.
It's hard to say without seeing you, because if you're already leading too much, with your chest. In other words, coming off the back or coming off the box, your back is super arched, and it's then for me to sit there and tell you to come up with your chest or your sternum first when you're already doing it to a degree far over what you should be is going to be counterproductive to what you're doing. To where in that case, then I would want to tell you to come hips first. So it's going to be specific to whatever the lifter's technical issues are. With that in mind, and with that stated, generally what I see 60% of the time, maybe more so, maybe a third of the time, is the lifter is not coming with their traps first, is how I is how I would explain it. When you start talking about chest first and stuff like that, you start getting into a little bit of a crazy territory, because instead of just adjusting the torso position, a lot of people will just arch even more than what they are, and it should be a neutral position. So I like to say sternum first, because that typically covers it, to where if you act like there's a string pulling your sternum to the ceiling, then that's, for most people that are dealing with this issue, that's usually the best fix. What you want to see is the bar come in a straight line on the way up. If it deviates a little bit, and you're in a close to medium stance, is probably okay. If it's a little bit, I'd still rather see it go in a complete straight line. In a wider stance, it needs to be in a straight line. It has to be, because if it starts to deviate even a little bit forward, the wider stance, usually the less basis support you're going to have. Toes are turning out a little bit more the wider somebody is, so that basis support becomes a little bit smaller than if toes are completely straight ahead. Some people can get wide and keep toes straight ahead, but it's a trained component. It's very hard to do. So most don't do that. Should they? Maybe, but they don't. So that's why I'm saying there's some deviation that I will allow based upon the stance, and the position that they're in. But if you're looking at it from the side and you're looking at that straight line, then typically you're going to be okay. It's going to be where you want to be. It's that shifting right out of the bottom where you'll see it come forward. That's where you don't want to see. Even if I accept the fact that it may come forward a little bit, it's not going to be out of the bottom where I want to see it. It's going to be once they start to cross midway a little bit. But straight out of the bottom, that's going to be counterproductive, because what that's usually going to be indicative of is the person's lifting with their hips before the traps, basically you want to try to throw the bar against the wall behind you as you come up. So that's the motion that I'm trying to achieve and that I want to see. And it's usually easier for people to understand from that standpoint.
This guy said, Dave, I've been trying for years to balance strength training and basic requirements for military and current first responder career paths. Is there a sweet spot between strength and fitness?
Yeah, and you're probably almost there. So I say that because your question was worded very telling. So you've been trying for years and years, which means you found a lot of things that aren't working for you. And that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. A lot of people think that's a bad thing. That's a really good thing, especially if you're trying to figure this shit out yourself, because inherently what was close to working and what wasn't, what worked for a little while, then failed, and so forth. So you're getting there, especially if you've been trying to figure this out for a few years. You're closer than you think you are. It may just be the next 6 months you figure it's really damn close. It's there. So just trust in your instincts and what you've learned along the way, and it's going to come together. It's going to come together sooner than you think.
Okay. This one's a broad one, but we'll see what you got with it. He said, training whilst sick, take the days off or push through?
Man, that depends. I've seen all kinds of rules that are out there. If it's, I get them all. I've seen it actually both ways. That if it's above your neck, then you shouldn't train, or if it's above your neck, you shouldn't train. If it's below your neck, you should. And vice versa. I've seen both, so it's the craziest thing in the world. Here's my take on it is it depends what your issue is. If your issue is contagious, have some respect for the other people in the gym and stay the fuck home. I don't care what you have going on. It probably isn't worth it. Now, where things get a little complicated is, as I'm coughing here, if you're training for a meet or competition or bodybuilding show or whatever it's going to be, and there's a specific deadline in place, you have to really ask yourself if the training session, how much the training session really matters. And all sessions matter. Don't get me wrong on all that. But sometimes missing a session here and there is the best thing that you can do. It's kind of that non-programmed deload, which any complaint I've ever had about deloads is the fact that life throws you enough deloads as it is, and that the deload should already inherently be built into a training program. So if the program's developed effectively, then there really isn't a need for a deload because it's structured into the program as far as how waves and training cycles and the progression is laid out, which in essence means that there's deloads programmed in there. So it's just a term, it's just a word. So from that standpoint, where the problem comes in is if you're sick and you're going to take that day off, just to recover, so you're not going and making everybody else sick. And this is probably not going to make that much of a difference in the grand scheme of things when getting ready for a competition, whatever it is. Now, if the week before this, you had to miss sessions because you had to go out of town for work, and then the week before that, you had to miss sessions because, it was a family birthday, and that's where the problem starts to fall in. So you have to be very selective on how many times you're cashing in those cards to take that day off. Again, if you're training for a meet, I'll speak about the other side of this in a second. But if you're training for a meet, you only have so many times you can get away with that shit. And it's not 3 times a month or 2 times a month. So if you already cashed in those cards and you're sick, then you're probably going to have to force it to be able to go in. Just be courteous. The other people in the gym, wipe the shit down that you use. Don't cough on other people. Cover your mouth. Do everything that you can do to not get other people sick. That's the way I would approach it. And then I've always told other people to approach it, because if you do that, then you're doing everything that you need to do for yourself to be able to make sure you're not making yourself that much worse. Now, if you're hacking up a lung and your abs are sore as hell from coughing for 2 days and stuff like that, you may have to adjust what you're doing in the gym, because you don't want to pop a rib out. I've seen that. I've seen people tear muscles, pull muscles, because they're in the gym between sets and they start coughing and they're in a compromised position where they're doing an accessory exercise, start coughing in a compromised position. They get hurt, and I've never seen anybody get hurt doing something that you would think they could get hurt doing when they're in the gym sick. I've also never seen anybody really get hurt, from training and making themselves even more sick from whatever it is. I'm not a doctor, keep that in mind. But I have seen people get hurt a lot because of stupid shit the coughing, sneezing, crap like that happens in the gym, as funny as it sounds, this is for real shit. And from that standpoint, now, if you're not training for meet, then I don't see the significance of having to force it, other than it's your own ego that can't deal with it. You know, you're not going to lose gains because you're going to miss a couple of days because you're sick. It's probably going to do you better to rest and recover, just because if you're of that mentality, you probably haven't rested and recovered for a year already. So that sickness is in a way doing you a favor to get the fuck out of the gym and recover a little bit more.
Okay, 1 second. This guy said speed bench on Saturday or Sunday on the classic conjugate template.
I've done both. I can't really say that one's better than the other. I can say Saturday sucks because I was squatting on Friday. So it was just harder, but Sunday was better for the bench, but then it wasn't so great for the max effort work that was on Monday. So there's a balance between the two. I'm not really sure one was better than the other. For the lifters that train out here, they squat on Saturday, bench on Sunday. And while that's not the most optimal scenario in the world, they adapt to it fairly fast. And it's not that big of a deal. So it can be either or. Let's put it this way. Don't be married so much to one that it inhibits you from being able to train with people who can help you. So if you think it has to be on Saturday, but there's a group of people training on Sunday that could really help, then go on Sunday, and vice versa. So I don't think it matters one way or another. You're going to have to adapt.
Okay. This guy said, my goal is to keep being able to walk, lift, and move well as I age. Is Olympic lifting, powerlifting, or bodybuilding type of lifting good for the goal? How would you choose or help someone make that choice?
Based on my experience, bodybuilding is the far away winner, because the loading isn't as high. So when you're bodybuilding, you're not training with heavy triples, singles. Very rarely are you even doing fives. So the loading or the intensity of the load isn't as high. And the frequency of that isn't going to be as high either. The repetitive movement patterns isn't going to be the same. It's going to be greater than what the bodybuilding is. So even while the slightest change in a movement pattern can make a difference on wear and tear, it's still really similar. If you're dealing with a bench press, close grip bench, a board press, and all pressing, pretty much same movement pattern to a degree. So that's kind of where, the wear and tear comes from that standpoint. With Olympic lifting, I've never done it. I don't know that much about it. I don't know the coaching about it, but the wear and tear is going to be repetitive the same way that it's going to be for powerlifting, simply because you're training to increase 2 lifts. Powerlifting, you're training to increase 3. When you're using a bodybuilding style of programming, the wear and tear can still be there. It can still be achy. You can still fuck yourself up doing that. Many people have. But in general, the load is going to be lower because most of the sets are going to be done in 6, 10 greater rep ranges. The movement patterns are vastly not different, but expanded. So in bodybuilding, you're going to be dividing the training for the most part, for most people, based upon body part. So you're going to be working in every movement pattern in less frequency and load than in powerlifting. So I'm trying to figure out how to describe this a little bit better. Because in powerlifting, you're still should be doing, training in all movement patterns, just from a standpoint of making sure you're not developing these huge imbalances, but you are still developing imbalances, because the imbalances are going to be developed when you're trying to maximize the strength in a squat, bench, and deadlift. People will theorize and say that no, it's the most balanced you can possibly do, but that's not fucking true. It's training to be the best in 3 lifts. Olympic lifting, the best in 2. Bodybuilding, you're not training to be the best in any lift. You're just training to develop the best physique, muscle mass that you possibly can. So the wear and tear, it's going to be less, from a loading standpoint. Now, from a volume standpoint, the number of repetitions total over a period, of a week, that's probably going to be higher. So that brings up the debate of what's worse over a long period of time. The higher repetitions or the load of the repetitions. And something can be said, positive and negative for both. But with the bodybuilding, in most cases, what you're looking at is not only just that higher volume, but that higher volume is done at a lot lower intensity, some weight, more or less. And a lot of the bodybuilding training, maybe not a lot, but say 30, maybe even as high as 50%, it's going to be done with really light weights, relatively speaking. Dumbbells and stuff like that are not going to be loading, the joints as much as what a heavy barbell would. And I pause because there's always scenarios to where that's not true, where the dumbbells will load more. I'm using very general statements here from that standpoint. So if given the 3, for most people, that would be the direction that I would go.
Okay. This guy said, I'm in my mid-20s with 2 serious years of training, hoping to do a meet this year. I have borderline low testosterone. Should I wait to use tests to make my levels more normal, or just jump on now to be normal?
That's a question that you need to discuss with your doctor. That's not something I'm qualified to discuss or do. From that standpoint, what constitutes low test and how's that being determined? That's a big question there. But that's something to discuss with your doctor, bud. And I can't help you with that.
Okay. Is it a good idea to do max effort and dynamic work for the same movement on the same day?
No.
I figured that'd be a quick one. Would you recommend anything other than sleep and nutrition for recovering after a heavy max effort day? You've talked in the past about flotation tanks and other things.
Yeah, those are obviously the best. Those are the things that you should have the most control over. And those are the things that most people are going to kind of suck at. So if sleep is bad, then try to dig a little bit deeper to figure out why the sleep is bad. What is the last, what's the last meal? Is the room too cold? Is the room too hot? Is the room not dark enough? There's a lot of things that you can play around to try to be able to get more sleep. Do you need a CPAP? Can you breathe? Are you waking up snoring? There's a ton of things that kind of impact the sleep area. To me, it's better to dig deeper there before looking at all these other modalities, because if that's screwed up and it's not as optimal as it can be, and I understand for everybody that's never going to be 100% optimal, just because of lifestyle and stress and work and however, those factors all come into play. It's silly to think that everybody can make that 100% optimal, but everybody can make it better. So my answer here revolves around what things can make that better, because those things from a financial standpoint probably going to be less than some of the other things. Those things from a recovery standpoint are going to repay way faster than anything else that's going to go in there. Now, to answer the question the way that the person wants to be answered is from the max effort work, especially lower body max effort work, can beat the shit out of you. And not so much from a DOMS or muscle soreness standpoint, just from the soreness or the standpoint of you feel like you got hit by a club when you wake up the next day. Movement is the best thing for that. So light sled dragging, just walking, just anything to just move is going to make a world of difference. And contrast shower, stuff like that also help, but that becomes more beneficial if you do those and then you go move. So you're using that as a way to try to get some of the stiffness out so you can get up and drag a sled, move, stuff like that. So the active recovery is always the best in my opinion and should be the first place to go. Passive recovery can move on from there, but the active is going to be the route to go because it's going to have more circulation than what any of the passive modalities will.
Okay. How to be better at loading the hamstrings at the bottom of a deadlift, since it's a problem to stay down and let me figure out the wording of this. Since it is a problem to stay down since hold on, this is worded very poorly. Let me just see what he's trying to say here. But it looks like he's basically wondering how to load the hamstrings better at the bottom of a deadlift.
The question I would have is why. I mean, that would be the first thing. But to answer the question, just shift your weight back. I mean, it's that easy. So if that's what you want to do, just hold the bar and just let your weight shift back a little bit, and you're going to feel your hamstrings begin to activate. But that still leads, to the why. Why do you think that's necessary would be the first thing. And that's really, really hard to be able to help unless we have a video to be able to look at. So something maybe we can look at in the future is to actually get some people's videos and then to have me analyze those while we're doing the podcast. Then you guys can see what I'm looking at and then why I'm making the suggestions that I am. So we can look and see if we can start doing things like that, because a lot of these questions that come in that are technique related are really, really hard to answer because I don't have anything to look at.
Okay. How to overcome forearm pain when just started out benching, shirt benching rather.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that came to my head was just fucking get used to it. So, because that's part of it. That's something that you're going to have to adapt to over a period of time. Where things get a little tricky is your forearms are killing you because of the added weight that you have to support and hold. The other reason why is that arm is digging in, to your forearm, bicep as you lower the weight a lot, so it's kind of cutting off circulation. You know what it's doing. You have the shirt on. So you know what I'm talking about. So it's digging all that shit in, which if I was just to grab your arm, right, without the bencher, just grab your arm and start sticking my thumbs into your forearm, your bicep, the bicep tendon, just digging the shit out of that, it's going to hurt. If I do it hard enough for a couple hours, which may be how long you have your shirt on. I mean, it's on and off, but you get what I'm saying. Then the next day, your arms are going to hurt like hell. So what I'm getting at here is you don't want to start adding a lot of forearm training and stuff like that right now, because it's just going to make the situation worse because you're pounding it and it's not able to recover from the pounding that you're doing. So let it kind of adapt a little bit to that before you put even more work on it. What you can do though is after the bench session, one thing I always found really effective with people is like a Dixie cup, freeze it with water, and then you peel it off a little bit. And then you use the ice and just dig the shit out of your forearms and bicep with that. When I say after your training session, I'm speaking like before you leave the gym or in your car. Just you want to get that inflammation out of there as fast as you can. So, I mean, if you got snow on the ground like we do now, just all you really need are freezer bags or plastic bags. Throw the shit in, throw the ice in there, and put that shit on your arms while you're in the parking lot or after you're done benching, and get that out. What's going on with my headphones? Before.
Did you lose them?
No, I'm stepping on the wire. From that standpoint, and then once it starts to feel a little better, then start throwing in things like hammer curls. And also, I'm going to guess, and I'm probably right, that if you try to do a barbell curl right now, you probably can't even grab the bar because you're not going to be able to turn your wrists under. So you can start doing this now, by the way. Just grab the bar. Use the widest grip that you have to, just so you can actually grab it in a curl position. I don't want you to curl at all. Just grab it and hold it. You know, maybe shrug. You're not going to load this at all. It's just going to be the bar. So shoulder shrugs or whatever, just some movement to be able to have some blood circulating in the area. But what you want to do is to be able to start working the grip in a little bit to where you can get it in a position to where it's closer than your bench grip. Maybe work it into where your pinky is on the ring comfortably. Then once you get comfortable, you can start doing sets of 5, 6. I mean, you don't need to do a lot. Just a few sets of 5. You never need to load it as well. All you want to do is to get that range of motion back to where that's not going to be as bound up in there than normal from that standpoint. And this sucks, by the way, to be able to do this. What I will tell you to do is don't start with the curl bar. Don't start with dumbbells. It does not work. I've never seen it work. Start with the widest grip that you can on a barbell. And I've seen people have to go damn near all the way out to the sleeves, to start with, and then move it in from there. And that's it. That's what it is. It's kind of part of the game, but I'm telling you this right now, you want to take care of it, because if you don't, and you keep forcing and forcing and forcing, what's going to happen is the bones of your forearm are going to start to fracture. And over a long period of time, what potentially can happen there is not good. And that's forearm breaks and stuff like that. I'm not saying everybody that puts a bench shirt on is going to break their forearm, but what I am saying is this is kind of how it all starts, and it can progress and get really bad from there. So this is one of the things that if you're going to stay and multiply and stuff like that, you have to address this, or down the line it's going to get really bad. Okay. It's going to make it really fucking hard to squat too.
Right. This guy said he struggles with conventional deadlifts right off the floor. I know you'd need to see a video, Dave, but off the top of your head, what might the weakness be there?
Tightness. If you're not bound up in like a spring, in the deadlift, when you start, it's going to be really hard to generate force. So positioning is important there. I don't want to get into all different types of cueing on what you should do and all that, because I think that's really getting to a point now where people are just more fucking confused than they are anything else. So I want to kind of strip it down to just the complete basics. Make your body as tight as you possibly can, and then start from that position and see what happens.
Okay. What are your thoughts on the Smith machine and people that critique the use of it?
I don't see it. It's a tool. I don't see anything wrong with it. I don't see anything wrong with any machine as far as that goes. They're all a tool. The biggest negative with the machines are probably cost, but they all can serve a function and a purpose. So I'll just use the Smith machine as an example. We have one in here. It doesn't get used a lot. Fuck, it may not have even been used in the past year. But things that it is used for, JM presses on a Smith machine is probably one of the easiest ways to teach somebody how to do a JM press, because it's forcing you to stay in a specific bar pattern, or specific bar path. That's what I'm trying to say there. I mixed pattern and path, but a specific bar path. Other things are, for myself, if my back gets jacked up, which is rare, I can get in there and do very, very restricted range of motion, RDLs, or from the top, and work it down slowly over a period of sets until it's further down. Stiff legs, if you really want to hit the hamstrings, that's an option to where you'll be able to hit those harder there than you may even be able to do with a barbell, because of how hard you can shift back and not have the bar go with you. So there's a lot of things like that there's things that you can do there that can't be done any other way. Can they be duplicated any other way, like a bar sliding up and down a power rack, which I call stripping the rack? Most definitely it can be done, but it's just fucking easier, which is why I have it in here, because all you need to do is go grab it, flip it, and go. So you don't have to set anything up. So I understand the debate with squatting on it and the force on the knees and all that other kind of stuff, but nobody's sitting here selling you that you have to do every squat session using the Smith machine. That's stupid. Nobody's going to tell you to do that. Now, if somebody's trying to decide between putting a Smith machine in their house versus a squat rack, that's kind of a simple decision. It's the squat rack, because you're going to be able to do more things in it than you would otherwise. But no, there's no evil machine. There's no evil exercise. It's how it's utilized and how it's used.
Correct. This guy said, I know you're not the biggest advocate of the overhead press. Do you think it could have use to build general shoulder strength in order to increase your bench? He said he's been chasing a 400-pound bench, I'm assuming, currently at 370. And shoulder strength seems to be my weak point, as I cannot overhead press 185 pounds. Okay.
You're right. I'm not a big advocate of it. Personally, I like things like, a dumbbell press, one-arm dumbbell press, standard seating, stuff like that. But that's my bias, right? So I'm not going to sit here and tell somebody that it doesn't work when I've seen it proven otherwise tons of times. So I know a lot of people that don't like it because it bothers them. So I know both sides of the spectrum here. So if it's something that is way off, like in your case, you think it's way off, what it should be, then put it in to get it up to what you feel normal is and see what it does to your bench. Because if that goes from, 185?
Overhead press of 185.
If it goes from 185 to 225 and your bench goes up, then that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination. So you always want to experiment with different stuff like that. You should, regardless of what anybody tells you, if you think that's a weak point, and you wouldn't be asking this question if you didn't think it was. If you think it is, what harm does it do to be able to focus on it and throw it in for 4 to 6 weeks and see what happens? It's not like your bench is going to go backwards, or in 4 to 6 weeks you're going to, overuse it so bad that you're tearing shit apart. It's the negatives are kind of low compared to what the positives could be. So try it, see what happens.
Okay. This guy said, if you don't have access to a belt squat machine but wanted to do belt squats, how would you go about imitating and mimicking that lift?
You can get a belt squat belt, and most of them come with chains already, and just slip the plate on there, stand on a couple blocks or benches, or benches are kind of high. People do use it, but it's kind of a pain in the ass to get up and down from that. But if you're just standing on, most gyms have some kind of risers or box or something like that, and go that route. Just fine. It's pretty simple to duplicate that. Yeah, we have attachments that you can put on racks and so forth as well. So it's not hard to duplicate. Just the biggest thing you need to duplicate it is the belt to be able to support it. Because if you're just trying to run a strap around your power belt, weight belt, or whatever you're using, it will work, but the weight kind of swings, right? And it swings back, it like racks your nuts, and that's not a good thing. But it can be done that way, but more optimal is just to get a belt squat belt, go that route. And the belt squat belt can be used as a dip belt, can be used as a chin belt. A lot of times you can use a dip belt or a chin belt for the belt squats, but they're not made for that. So you can break the belt if you put too much weight on there, but that's not going to happen with a belt squat belt. But if you want to see if you can simulate it and there's a dip belt or something around, you can always throw a plate, maybe 2 plates on there, and see if your setup is going to allow you to simulate it in a way that, the plate's not hitting the ground and that you're getting a decent range of motion and so forth.
Okay. How would you structure extra workouts when using the conjugate method?
Well, the first defining if you actually need them, which we've had several questions on this, so you can probably go back and find those. But to structure them, it would be what type of extra workout are you looking to put in there? Is it a workout for recovery? Is it a workout for, to bring up weak points, or is it a workout for like a feeder workout, which is kind of recovery as well, just a little different form?
That's what I took it as, but
Yeah. So if it's for recovery, it can just be light work done the day afterwards, just to get blood flowing through the body. Blood brings nutrients. Nutrients help the body to recover. So that's the whole thing with that. It isn't so much about how much you're going to lift or what you're doing with that. It's just getting body parts moving to get blood in there to help recover. That's the goal there. If it's for a feeder workout, it can be something that's done the night before a training session if it's in the morning, or something done in the morning if a training session's later. Again, that's just something that's going to put blood into the body part, which that's going to be specific to whatever you're trying to get ready. So if it's a bench, it could be triceps, shoulders, stuff like that, just to get a little blood in there to help recover and prime, everything, I suppose, is what you would define it as. If it's to bring up certain body parts, the first area would be there is a lot of people have a hard time figuring out where to get their lat work and if they're doing conjugate work, where for me, I just rather have row type movements on a couple of days of the week and, vertical pulling on a couple of days a week. So horizontal pulling a couple of days, vertical pulling. So you split it up over different days. Where it goes doesn't matter. So it's just the consistency is the important part with that. Some people don't like that, so they'll opt to do lat work on an extra workout, which is fine. But the problem that I've always had with that is people tend to skip extra workouts far more than they will main workouts. So if you're taking stuff out of your main workout to put in an extra workout, then you don't do it. Then you're not ever getting that work done, which is worse than if you just would have kept it where it was.
Okay. Best way to improve grip for when deadlifting when you have short, chubby fingers?
Ice your hands. Get as much fluid out of the hands as you can. That would be if it's before meet or even a training session. If it's really bad, that's a quick fix. The other thing when you're talking about grip is you have to work the fingers, because your pinky finger is going to be the first thing to go in a deadlift. So if you can keep the pinky finger from opening up, then the rest of the hand's not going to follow suit. So what are you doing to be able to strengthen the fingers? So hex dumbbell holds would be one way. Just keep your fingers off the numbers because there's a little ridge there. So keep your fingers off the ridges. Just grab, kind of palm, pick it up so it's just in your fingers and hold as long as you can. That's going to be way better than a barbell hold, where barbell hold, yes, may be more specific, but the barbell hold isn't going to be working your fingers as specifically as what the hex dumbbell hold will be. So anything that's going to make you hold, with the fingers, and there's a lot of attachments that you can use on cables for pull downs, rows, stuff like that, which are blocks, grenade balls, stuff like that, that you want to focus on keeping the fingers as taut and flexed as you possibly can to go from there. Other thing to remember with grip is you can overtrain it very fast. So start with just training it on the days that you're doing lower body and just keep it there and see how that plays out. Then if need be, you can take it up from there, but it's not something you want to jump right into doing 4 days a week with.
Okay. What are the cues you use teaching a lifter how to activate their quads to initiate a sumo deadlift?
I don't worry about that What I worry about is what cues do I need to do to get the person to pull the sumo deadlift correctly. So maybe the quads are activating automatically, just without needing a cue. There's a lot of things that don't fucking need cues that just happen automatically. And there's a lot of people that do most of the stuff right without cues. The only time you need a cue is if somebody's not doing something from that standpoint. And that's a coaching thing to be able to know that. You can come up with 100 fucking cues for every single lift, and everybody wants a cue for every damn thing. Why? Because if you're doing, out of 100 things, you're doing 99 of them right, why in the hell do you need to cue something that you're doing right? That's just creating a fucked up learning environment for the person to be able to respond and understand the one cue that they actually have to do. So from that standpoint, you have to look at the mechanics of the lift. So if you're looking at a sumo deadlift, how's this supposed to look? What's a textbook version of this? Because there's technique, form, and style. So what's the optimal technique from this? What would be the perfect version? Which hardly anybody is going to be able to do. That's why you have form and style. Everybody is going to have their own form, which is going to break that down based upon their biomechanical levers, their body weight, all these factors that are based upon how they're built. And then style is going to be both based upon their own flair or whatever the fuck you want to call it, to be able to fit in there. And then once you figure that out, you want to look at yourself, if it's a video or if you're looking at a lifter. I try to look at that lifter first and like they're a skeleton. So I remove all the soft tissue and all. So I'm trying to look at them as they're doing the lift like I'm looking through an x-ray to see what they're doing and how are all the bones and how's that all moving from that standpoint. What's going on with the rib cage? What's going on, with the femur, tibia, what's going on with the spine? What are all these things doing while they're doing the motion? If I look at it and try to remove all that and just look at the bones and how the bones are moving, from that standpoint, I can see where the biggest issues are typically falling, and then correct those issues on whatever cue I have to use to be able to get that person to fix that issue. It may be more related to the rib cage than it's going to be somebody's quads. From that standpoint, once I get through there, then I'm going to look at it like it's an anatomy chart, and they're moving through that from the biomechanics standpoint and trying to remove the skin and look at all the muscle tissue and how that's flexing, moving, and synchronizing, then from that standpoint, cueing whatever needs to change from there. I'd like to be able to close my eyes and see how the nerves and all that are fine, but I can't figure that one out. But the other two are very easy for me because I've done it forever. So if you just look at it from that standpoint, then cue from the bones out, and you're going to have a lot greater success than trying to cue from a muscle group in, if that makes any sense. I don't know what.
I think it makes sense. All right. Assuming I already own a power bar, a deadlift bar, and a safety squat bar, what are the top picks for specialty bars and the benefits of each of them?
A power bar? What was the other one?
So he said he's got a powerlifting bar, or a power bar, a deadlift bar, and a safety squat.
I mean, off the top of my head, I'm thinking American cambered press bar, and I'll give you the reasons for that, but I'm kind of looking through the gym real quick to make sure that I'm not forgetting anything. Yeah, I would go with that. The reason I would go with that is because the number of exercises are a lot more. So it's not so much the pressing, it can be the overhead pressing, it can be rows. Because of that camber, you're able to pull further than what you could if it was a barbell, because the barbell's going to hit first. And with the camber, you can also flip it around when you're pressing. So it's kind of like a restricted range that you would get, because it's going to hit you before than it would otherwise. So I would go with that. I would go with the cambered American press bar.
Okay, here's a good one to end on. This guy said, is there any question that nobody really asks you that you're just dying to answer?
No.
You've been asked a lot
No,
of
I've been
questions.
asked a lot of questions, man. I've been answering questions for online since 1998. So,
And then in person since...
oh God, that goes way back. But online, probably between all mediums, the least amount per month, 1,000. You know, if you look at all medians, you know, if it's social media now, which is what it was before we had a Q&A, then there were forums and all this other stuff. So, you know, over, let's say at the very least, over 500 questions per month at the very least, where it's probably more closer to 1,000 every month since 1998. That's a lot of fucking questions. And a lot of them change. You know, my answers are going to change over a period of time where, you know, you learn new things, you know, so I'm always learning different things. So it makes me wonder, you know, if the question could be answered in a better way, or if I'd answer it differently. And, you know, there's multiple ways to answer every question. So a lot of the times it's with a lot of these, it's trying to figure out what context the question is being asked from, so I can be able to answer it as specifically as I possibly can instead of completely generalized. So if I was able to do anything, or, you know, to wish anything, it would be for the questions to be asked, for me to be able to answer the questions knowing the exact context that the information is going to be used in. And I don't know if there's ever going to be a way to be able to do that. So
Unless they have videos with it.
yeah, and training history and medical history, and, you know, there's a lot of other things. So a lot of it's just when I try to answer the questions to plant seeds of ideas in people's minds. So maybe I'm not giving the answer that they're really looking for, but if I can get them to at least think about their question a little better, then I strongly believe that in most cases, everybody can answer the questions for themselves. It's just leading them in the direction for them to be able to do that in the most effective manner is the key to all of it, or my goal with all of it.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody who asked questions. As you guys are probably noticing, we do the live stream questions first always. So we appreciate the Instagram and the YouTube community ones. But if you guys want your question answered, I would do it on a live stream, kind of first come, first serve. So thanks again for everything, and see you next time.
Thank you, guys.